So I've already recommended some songs for next month. Let's actually recommend some books now, shall we? Hi everyone, my name's Chloe, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for being here today. Today's video is going to be my recommendations video for West End Readathon. For anyone who doesn't know, West End Readathon is a new readathon that I will be hosting in the month of November. I'm going to link the original announcement video down below, but essentially it is all based around musical theatre. One of my favourite things in the world. We all know this. Well, if you watch my channel before, you will know this because I speak about theatre in pretty much every video that I do. So yeah, if you speak to me at all, you're going to know that I love theatre. So basically for the readathon, like I said, I will link the announcement down below so you can get all the specifics and things like that. But the general rule is that there are prompts themed around various different musicals. When I say various, there are 60 in total. And in order to complete the prompts, you first have to buy your ticket to that show, which means that you have to partake in some sort of content to do with the musical itself. So you either have to listen to a song, listen to the entire cast recording, watch a adaptation or a pro shot, go and see the show in person if you want to. Just something to do with the show. And then once you have bought your ticket for the show to watch it, you basically read the book that fits that prompt. Now, like I said, there are a lot of prompts. There are 60 of them, so I'm not going to spend too long going through things today. I'm just going to give you some quick recommendations on books that I like that fit these prompts. And for some of them, I may give you ideas of books that I may be reading for those prompts during the month of November. Now, some of these are more subjective than others. Some of these, like, I can't give you recommendations for because it very much depends on you, but I'm going to try as much as I can. Yeah, let's just get on with it. I will say that I am not actually going to be holding up the books for each of these. I'm going to make editing Chloe's life a lot harder and have to put pictures in here because I'm not getting 60 books off of my shelves, more because some of them I'm giving you a couple of recommendations for. But like I said, hopefully I will have remembered to put pictures of all of the books here. So the first musical that we have is Juliet, and the prompt for that is a retelling. So for this one, I'm going to recommend Olympus, which is a retelling of the Hades and Persephone myth from Greek mythology. There are obviously plenty of retellings out there, but when I was looking through like what I could recommend, I don't actually read that many. And I will say, actually, this is the perfect time to say this. The maximum amount of prompts you can do per one book is 2. So some of these actually double up to other things, and I've tried to put in recommendations that would like fit you in for a 2-show day if you wanted to. So Olympus definitely fits for another one later on, which is about mythology, but we'll get to that in a minute. There is also another recommendation later on that is a retelling. So yeah, some of them will fit for multiple, but I've tried to just put like each book once for each prompt, and I will flag it up if it does fit a couple of others as well. But yeah, Olympus is a graphic novel, so it's great for a readathon, and I really love the artwork. I was about to say there's 2 volumes out, but the third one's just come out. I just haven't acquired it yet. So there are 3 volumes out at the minute, which means that there's plenty for you to read. If you want to see Juliet a couple of times during the month, you can do that. Because I don't think I've actually said that in the announcement video, is that if you want to see a show more than once, read more than one book to fit the prompt, you can do that. You do have to listen to more than one song though, just so you bought those extra tickets as well. So I will say as well, this is one that I do have something in mind for me to read, because Juliet is actually a show that I'm going to see in the month of November, so I would like to read a book for it. I will actually be reading Olympus Volume 3 because, like I said, it is out now and I do need to acquire it. Next up we have the Addams Family, and for that you need to read a spooky book, which is very much not my type of book to read usually. So again, I struggled with this one a little bit, but I'm going to recommend A Diary of Blood, which is a newer release technically. It was self-pubbed and it's just been released by a traditional publisher. I also have a guess that it may be in a book box in the near future, and I really liked this book. I got an arc of it. It is actually a retelling, so it would work for Juliet as well, but it is all about one of Dracula's brides, and it's a really beautiful book actually about toxic relationships, which is also a prompt later on. See, I'm giving you all of the prompts with this book, and it's about being in sort of a bad relationship and sort of the healing that can come after that as well, and it's a very beautiful book, and I think you should all read it. On the flip side of that, the only other sort of spooky book I can think of is a middle grade arc that I've read fairly recently, which is The Double Trouble Society by Carrie Hill Fletcher. This is a witchy middle grade book where there's this abandoned house and then suddenly a witch arrives in town and the adults start to forget the children, and it was a fun time. It's a quick read. It would definitely fit for spooky as well. And I thought also a nice little bonus that is written by the original Wednesday Addams from the UK cast of the Addams Family. Next up we have Anastasia, which is a second chance. Now this can be taken in a few different ways. It can be a second chance romance, or it can be you giving a second chance to an author. Obviously if it's you giving a second chance to an author, I can't tell you what book that will be because I don't know what authors you've read and not necessarily loved before. For myself, I would say that J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman worked for this for me because I read The Aurora Cycle after not loving Illuminae, ended up liking the Aurora cycle, went back and reread Illuminae, and then really enjoyed it. So that's definitely a second chance that worked for me. In terms of second chance romance, I'm going to give one recommendation that is a classic. Please forgive me for this, but classic is also a prompt, so it would double up for that. For this, I'm going to say Persuasion by Jane Austen. In this book, the main character is older, although she's definitely not older, or she was just older for the time. She's unmarried. She nearly got married to somebody years ago, but her family kind of got in the way, and it is about what happens when he comes back. It's my favourite Jane Austen book. It's one of my favourite classics of all time, so I wanted to get this one recommended. I will say that I will be definitely doing this prompt in November, because Meg from 12 Books a Day helped me come up with a lot of these prompts, and it is also her birthday during the month of November and the same day as mine, so I promised her for her birthday month that I will read the book that she's been telling me to read for a while now, which is You Deserve Each Other, which is a romance about a couple that are due to get married, and they've kind of both decided that they don't want to get married, but neither of them wants to be left with the responsibility of paying for everything if they call off the wedding. So I believe they kind of try to do things to make the other one dump each other, and it is a second chance romance, so eventually I'm assuming they come back together. And I'm excited to read it, and it will definitely happen. I promise, Meg, it will happen in the month of November. We then have got Anything Goes, which is a book set at sea. For this one, I'm going to recommend To Kill a Kingdom, which is a Little Mermaid retelling. I said that I didn't read a lot of retellings, and now half the stuff I'm recommending is. So again, would also fit for Juliet. I don't remember the specifics of the story for this. I just remember actually really enjoying it. And there is a new book that's come out in the same world as this. I can't remember the title off the top of my head. I've done very poorly researched video, I'm very sorry. But I do want to read that one as well. And I would recommend To Kill a Kingdom because the main thing I do remember of it is just that I really enjoyed it. So definitely a recommendation. Sorry that I've not given you too much more of a description. I will say I do have another recommendation for this, but I was told it was too mean for it to be the main recommendation because it is the second book in a series, and apparently unless I was recommending the first book in a series I wasn't allowed to put it on here. That was Meg who said that. It is the second book in the Dark Shade of Magic trilogy, so it is A Gathering of Shadows. One of my favourite characters in this series is called Alucard Emery, and he is the captain of a ship, and the first sort of section of the second book in the series is set aboard a ship. So it's definitely set at sea. So if you are already reading A Dark Shade of Magic, then the second book will count for that. Or if you would like to start the series, the first book I'm sure will count for many other prompts, and you can just then get to the second one. Because I just really like the second book in all fairness, so I want to recommend it to people. We then have got Bear, a pop opera, and the prompt for this is underrated. Now again, you can take this in different ways. It can be a book that you've just not heard too much about, so you think it may be underrated. It might be that someone specifically told you that this book is underrated and you need to read it. For me, what I've done is I've looked through my shelves and seen which authors I like who maybe haven't got as many reviews on Goodreads, and one that jumped out at me was Simon James Green, who is also actually a second chance author for me, because I read a book by him. I read No, I Can't Even, and I didn't particularly like it. Wasn't sure if I was going to try any more of his books, and then he had a book coming out called You're the One That I Want, and the storyline of that one appealed to me a little bit more, so I thought I will try again, and I really enjoyed that one. And then since then I've read The Heartbreak Boys, which I also enjoyed, and then Gay Club, which is one of my favourite books that I've read so far this year. So definitely an author that I would recommend. He writes queer YA fiction. It's generally quite fun, quite funny. It's got a very British sense of humour, I would say, which is I think part of the reason why there aren't that many ratings for it as well, because he is a British author. So, and I don't think his books are necessarily published in the US and things like that, so not as wide of an audience, but he's also one that I don't hear that many people talking about. I will say that some of his books lean towards maybe more the younger side of YA than what I would normally reach for, but they are just really fun and I have a good time reading them. So we then have got Be More Chill, and the prompt is Friends, and for this I'm going to recommend some more just fun YA contemporaries. I'm going to recommend Anything by Becky Albertalli. Now her most popular book is Simon vs Homo Sapiens Agenda, which is one of my favourites and does have a really nice friendship group in there, but also her more recent releases, particularly Kate in Waiting, has a really strong focus on friendship, and also that book is all about theatre, so it is a good recommendation for this. But basically you've got Kate, the main character, and then you've got her best friend Anderson. Anderson is gay, and basically Kate and Anderson always have crushes on the same guys. They have communal crushes, they call them, and this is about what happens when they both have a crush on the same guy, and maybe one of them actually has a chance with this one, and they have to kind of see where their friendship is going to go from there. I really enjoyed this book. It works well for this prompt. It's also about theatre because they're both theatre kids and I love it so much. For Beauty and the Beast, we have Forced Proximity. I'm going to have to go with the "and they were roommates" trope, obviously, so I'm going to go with The Roommate by Rosie Dannon. You've probably heard me and my friends talk about this book quite a lot this year because most of us have read it. It's a very fun, quick read. It is a book that the less you know about it going into it, the better. So I'm not going to give you a full synopsis, other than the fact that basically the main character goes to move in with one of her childhood friends, who then promptly tells her that actually he's going away somewhere and he has rented the room out to someone else, and it is this character called Joshua Darling. So she ends up having to live with this guy that she's never met before, and things go from there. Forced Proximity, and they were roommates. Enjoy. Next up for Beetlejuice, we have a book about death, which, you know, could be another spooky book you recommend. I'm going to recommend a book about grief because I'm going to take it down a slightly different route. I'm going to recommend The Astonishing Colour of After by Emily X. Arpan. This is basically about a girl whose mother commits suicide and she is left kind of with the grief of that loss, as you would expect. And as part of that, she ends up going to visit her mother's family in Taiwan. And while she's there, she sort of connects with her mother's family, with her own sort of cultural background. And also she starts to kind of see her mother as this bird. So there is a mystical element to it as well. And I really, really love this book. It's very, very beautifully written. It's a heavy topic, but it's very, very well done. And it's one that I don't hear that many people talking about. So I wanted to recommend it on here. Then for Bombshell, we have It Deserved More. So obviously this prompt can definitely sort of tie in with underrated, or it can be that the book deserved more, like it had a sequel that never came out, or, you know, something else that it just deserved more of. For this, I'm actually going to go with one that the part that it deserved more of, it did actually get, and that is More Happy Than Not by Adam Silvera. So I actually went to an Adam Silvera event this weekend, and the thing I said to him when I got them signed was, "I'm so happy that you did this extra chapter," because basically this book is Adam Silvera's debut. It is about a main character called Aaron Soto, who lives in a world where there is this treatment you can have if you want to get rid of sort of trauma and bad memories. And this book is about him sort of struggling with his identity and struggling with whether or not he wants to go through this procedure. And the original version of this novel does not necessarily have the happiest ending. Adam Silvera has said himself it's to do with, like, he writes a lot of his books to sort of process his own trauma, and it's to do with where he was at when he was writing it. And he said that he always felt like he kind of did a little bit of a disservice to this character by not tying things up a little bit more for him, giving him a little bit more hope. And this extra chapter does that, and I'm very, very happy that it exists, because it's not sort of just putting a bow on everything and magically fixing things, but it just gives that slightly more hopeful aspect to it, and I feel like it's what the character deserved. And if I ever recommend this book to anyone, I always recommend that you try, if you can, to read the deluxe version with that extra sort of epilogue, because it is very needed. It was a much nicer read on the second read than it was in the first one. Next up we have Bonnie and Clyde, which is a book about crime, and for this one I'm going to go Six of Crows. I know it's a very obvious one, it's all set around a heist, but I love Six of Crows so much I had to get it on here somewhere. You can technically read this without having read the Shadow and Bone trilogy. That's what I did. If you have no interest on the Shadow and Bone trilogy, you can do that, but you know, if you want to read all of them, you can also do that. But it's basically about this group of 6 people all end up having to do this heist together, and they are not necessarily the most conventional group, and things go from there, and I love these characters with my whole heart. And yeah, that's going to be the book I recommend for Bonnie and Clyde. For the Book of Mormon, we're going to do a book about religion, and for this I'm going to recommend Release by Patrick Ness. So this is a book that's all set during one day. On one side you've got this story about this boy who is from a very religious upbringing. He's gay, he's not out to his family, he's struggling with that identity in this small town that he's in, and it's just this sort of coming of age storyline. On the other hand, you've got this weird speculative element to do with a ghost as well. It's a weird book to describe, but I really, really loved it. I read it in a day. I read it on a coach trip down to London, actually, the first day I got it, and I really, really loved it. It's my favourite Patrick Ness book, and Patrick Ness is actually an author that I really enjoy. And again, it's one that I just don't hear spoke about very often, so I thought I would recommend it to you. That seems to be the running. How many times can I say recommend in this video? That is the question. For Cabaret, we have a book set during a war. I'm going to go with the Poppy War. The clue is in the title. It's about a character called Rin, who manages to kind of train herself to take this test to go to this very elite school where she's trained in all sorts of things, including combat and what to do if there is a war. Not necessarily expecting a war to happen, and then about halfway through this book there is a very strong tonal shift where war suddenly starts. It's a fantasy book. There is a whole thing to do with gods in here as well. It's all based on the sort of real life wars that happen in China, and it's such a good book. There will be another Aracon recommendation on here later on. You can all guess that it's going to come up. But Poppy War was the first Aracon book I read. It is her first book, and it started sort of my love of her writing, and I would like more people to read it, although I know plenty of people already have. For cats, we have a book with a bad adaptation, which I still find this prompt quite funny, and we're going to recommend another Patrick Ness book, because I was trying to think of things with bad adaptations, and a lot of them are books that I don't necessarily love. Like I know there are some like big series and things that people will say for this, but they're not necessarily my favourites anyway. Whereas The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness is one of my favourite books, and I really, really did not like that film. It only came out recently. It had Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley in it. It was setting itself up for success, and then they just handled some things very, very badly. Particularly, there is one like gut-wrenching scene in this book, and because of the one thing that they'd chosen to do in how this film is set up, it meant that all the emotion of that scene just like didn't happen. Like, it was still sad because it was an event that was always going to be sad, but just not like the rip your heart out of your chest type sadness that the book is. This is set in a world where there are only men, and everyone can hear each other's thoughts. So it's something called the noise. So basically constantly people's thoughts are just blaring out into the abyss. And then one day our main character discovers a girl and he can't hear her thoughts, and it goes from there. And I really, really love this trilogy. But yeah, the film is not great, and I can understand why they are not carrying on with that series. If you do want to see a good film adaptation of a Patrick Ness book, watch A Monster Calls instead. That is a fantastic film. We then have got Chess, which is a monochromatic book, and for this I'm going to recommend The Night Circus. It is a very black and white book. There is the hint of red in there as well, but you know, black, white and red is very much the colour scheme for this book, so it definitely fits. You can also go with a book that is very sort of black and white in like its structure or something like that. Like if it's a very like good and evil world, you can do that. I've gone for the actual like monochromatic in how it looks. It's about a competition between two magicians, but it's really not. That's how people explain it, and it's not a big like trial fight competition. It's a subtle game of one-upmanship is how I would describe it, but it's really beautiful. It's really lyrical writing. I love this book so much, and yeah. For Chicago, we have a book with trials. So for this, I'm going to go with Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow, which is one of my favourite middle grades I've ever read. I don't read a lot of middle grades, and I'm very cautious of giving them 5 stars just because there's always something it's always something that just doesn't quite make it a 5-star for me. But this one it is about a character called Morrigan Crow who is thought to be very unlucky, and she's destined to die on, I always get the date wrong, but I think it's her 13th birthday. 13 sounds right, obviously unlucky for some. And basically the eve of her 13th birthday, she ends up getting taken away to this mysterious land, and when she's there she ends up having to do these trials to get into the Nevermore Society. And trials, there we go. I really, really love this series, and I did actually really love the second one as well, and I need to carry on with the third one, but those ones don't have trials, so I can't use them for this prompt, unfortunately. For Cinderella, we have a moving book, and for this I'm going to go with Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian. This one is about the AIDS crisis in the late 80s, early 90s in New York. It's about an Iranian boy who is struggling with his identity and very scared of admitting that he's gay, because all he sees of gay people is them dying in the news, basically, because it's during the AIDS crisis. And it's a really like well done book around that, but also the particularly sort of moving part for me. They got to the last chapter, and there's one particular thing where I'm sort of reading it, and then all of a sudden I realised like what real life event it was referencing, and I was like, oh no. And I don't cry a lot of books, but this one definitely got me. Like, it's heartbreaking in a way, because I can't even explain it without spoiling it. But if you've read it, or if you do read it this month, feel free to come and have a chat with me about it, and I'll explain what it is that really sort of got me with this book. For Come From Away, it's a book set in another country, so I'm not going to give you any recommendations for this because obviously I do not know what country you are in. For me, that'd be anything that is not set in England, so there's plenty of those books. Loads of the books that I've already mentioned are set in America, so I am actually planning on seeing Come From Away in November, so I probably will be doing this prompt, but I'm just going to pick whichever book I'm reading that is, like I said, likely to be set in America. If you want to set it in a fantasy world as well, that is definitely another country. There you go. For company, we have a book with a wedding, and for this one I'm going to recommend The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. This is about two people who don't necessarily get along. They are the maid of honour and best man at a wedding, and everybody else at the wedding ends up coming down with food poisoning, and so they end up going on the honeymoon together, even though they don't get on. We all know that a romance is going to happen. I'm now realising this also works for Forced Proximity, and it works for Enemies to Lovers, which is later on. I really enjoyed this book. It's another quick, easy romance to read. I've tried to get some quick reads on here because I know there are a lot of prompts. For Dear Evan Hansen, we have a character struggling with their mental health, and for this one I'm going to recommend Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, which is a book I don't hear enough people talk about, and I love it so much. It is about a character called Aza who is struggling with OCD, and basically, if you read the synopsis of this book, it makes it sound like it's this hunt for a missing billionaire, and it is kind of, but it's really not. It is about Aza's struggle with her mental health, and I will say that this book, like the way that panic attacks in particular are written about in this book, is very, very realistic, and I would say if you're not in the best place, maybe be careful if you are thinking about reading it. But for me, it was like actually quite cathartic to read it, as somebody who has had panic attacks, does still have them from time to time. I really liked the way that it was depicted on page, and it's just a book that has stuck with me since I've read it. I am also a big fan of John Green. I've been watching his YouTube channel that he has with his brother since like near enough the beginning. I think actually there is a recommendation for Hank coming up in a minute, and yeah, I may be a little bit biased, but I do really, really adore this book. For Everybody's Talking About Jamie, we have a book set in your hometown, because Everybody's Talking About Jamie is set in Sheffield, which is where I'm from. And for this one, I can actually hold it up because I'm reading it right now. I can't find a book that's set in Sheffield, but I have got one that's set partly in Yorkshire, and that is Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. That is what this book is. It's just because I've not got the dust jacket on it at the minute. But yeah, part of this is set in Yorkshire. Obviously this is going to change depending on where you are. I will say if you want to stretch it a little bit so that it's near your hometown, feel free, but like I said, this one is very subjective to you. For Evita, we have a book with a narrator, and for this I have chosen An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. So this book tells the story of April May, who one day is wandering through New York City and discovers this giant metal structure that she thinks is just an art installation, and she does a silly little YouTube video with it, and then lo and behold, the next morning she wakes up and finds out that actually all these structures have appeared all over the world. They are possibly the first sign of aliens on Earth, and her video has gone viral, and she is suddenly like the authority on these aliens. The actual like conversation of the book is about that sort of viral video success and like building an audience and how you keep that audience, and the sort of negative relation and the negative things that come alongside it, and while also being a sci-fi story as well. And I really, really loved this duology, and it does have a couple of different narrators. It's mainly April May, but there are a few others that join in, particularly in the second book in the series. Well, obviously I'm recommending the first one, and yeah, I just wanted to get this in as a recommendation because it's one that I don't talk about a lot. Next up we have Frozen, which is a middle grade, and for this one I'm going to recommend Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This is another middle grade that I actually really enjoyed. This was one of the ones that got 4 stars, rather, because like I said, I'm struggle with finding a middle grade that gets 5 stars, but I did really, really enjoy this one, and I'm really excited for the sequel. So I'm going to recommend the first one to you, but I will possibly be reading the second one this month, or at least listening to the audiobook, because that's what I did with the first one. Basically it's about a character called Amari whose brother goes to this like elite school, and then suddenly he goes missing, and she gets an invitation to go to this school, and there's a little bit more to the school than what she thought, and things take a sort of more magical twist turn from there. And I really, really enjoy it, and I really did really enjoy this book. So that is my middle grade recommendation. For Fun Home, we have LGBTQIA+ rep, and for this one I'm going to recommend Heartstopper. It's a really easy recommendation, but I had to get it in there somewhere. It's one of my favourite books of all time. It is a graphic novel series about Nick and Charlie, who are 2 boys who meet in secondary school and end up developing a relationship, and it's just a really wholesome book, and it's got a nice sort of diverse range of LGBTQIA+ identities in there as well. For Funny Girl, we have Based on a True Story, and for this one I'm going to recommend It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. Now this one, when I say it's based on a true story, is because it's actually like loosely based on the author's life. He struggled with mental health throughout his entire life, and at one point he ended up admitting himself into a treatment facility. It's basically based on his time there, and I really enjoyed this book. I have read a couple of books by this author actually, because this is the author who wrote Be More Chill, which inspired the musical. I didn't love Be More Chill as a book, but it's kind of a funny story I did really enjoy. Again, maybe look up trigger warnings for it, because obviously this character does go through a lot. If you look into the story of the author himself, it's actually not a particularly happy one in the end. But I feel like this book has some really good discussions on mental health, and like I said, it is based on a true story, so it does fit this prompt. So for Grease, we have a book set in a school, and for this one I'm not going to talk too much about it because you've all heard me talk about it enough. But Babel is set at Oxford University. That is a school. Plea for more people to read Babel. Thank you. For Hadestown, we have a book about mythology, and for this one I am going to recommend another retelling, another Anne Juliet prompt. Why did I say I don't read retellings? Anyway, I'm going to recommend A Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a Greek myth retelling about Achilles and Patroclus. It is beautiful. I love this book so much. Again, more people should read it. This, I realised at the beginning of this video I was trying to give synopsis, and there are too many books for me to do this, so I'm just going to power through, and if you are interested in the title of any of these, please feel free to go and look them up, or if you want to ask me some questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And then I've got Hairspray, which is a book with a diverse cast. For this one I'm going to go with Me, My Dad and the End of the Rainbow, which is a middle grade, which is all about a child who... It's all about a child whose parents split up and he can't quite figure out why, and then he ends up finding a flyer in his dad's pocket which is for Pride, and he starts to realise the reason why his parents might split up, and basically he ends up going to Pride in London, and it is him going through the Pride parade and sort of meeting all the people along the way. So there is a very diverse cast involved there. If you look at the cover, like underneath the front cover, there is this picture which is just like, it's a rainbow picture of all the different people at Pride, and it's so diverse on that, so it had to be included for this recommendation. I just said I wasn't going to give synopsis, and then I gave a synopsis straight away. Of course I did. For Hamilton, we have a political book, and yes, I'm going to use this as my chance to get Red, Wine, Royal Blue on here as a recommendation. It's one of my favourite books of all time. It's my comfort read, we all know this. It is about Prince from the UK and the first son of the United States, and the relationship that develops there. It is all set during a presidential campaign. It is definitely political. I love this book so much. We then have Heathers, which is a book with a toxic romance. I've already mentioned toxic romance earlier on. I can't remember what it was, but I definitely did. I think it was Dowry of Blood. But then for this one I'm going to give you a slightly easier read because it is a graphic novel. It is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. This is one I read a while ago and I just remember really enjoying it, and I think I might actually reread it at some point. But basically, as the title would suggest, it does centre around toxic relationships, because someone keeps breaking up with you, that's not the best relationship to be in. For Hunchback of Notre Dame, we have a book about loneliness, and for this one I'm going to go with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, because in this, Addie basically makes a deal with a devil type character so that she can sort of live for a much longer period of time, potentially indefinitely. But the twist is that everybody's going to forget her. The second someone turns their back on her, they're going to forget that she exists. So she's kind of going through life without actually having any connections with anyone, until one day she eventually meets someone who does remember her. And there's definitely loneliness in Addie's life, so I think it's perfect for this prompt. We then have In the Heights, which is a debut, and for this one I'm going to recommend Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This is Aidan Thomas's debut that was published. Technically, Lost in the Neverwoods was written first, but it was published after, and I definitely prefer Cemetery Boys, so I'm going to recommend this one. It is about a transgender teen who is struggling with his family accepting him, and it's all to do with sort of the magic that runs in their family, because it is very gendered. There are Bruja and Brujo, and he is struggling to be recognised as a Brujo. So he takes it upon himself to do some Brujo magic and ends up with a ghostly friend, one of his classmates who has recently gone missing and is believed dead. And it is about him and it is about those two trying to figure out what happened and who Julian, the ghost killer, is. And I love this book so much, and just saying the synopsis is making me want to reread it. For Into the Woods, we have a fairy tale, and for this I'm going to recommend Geekerella by Ashley Poston, but to be honest I'm going to recommend all of the Once Upon a Con series. It is a series of YA romances that's all set around the world of fandom, and they are all fairy tale retellings, the first one being a Cinderella retelling, and I love this series so much. For Jesus Christ Superstar, we have a book with betrayal, and for this I'm going to recommend The Cruel Prince, because to be honest, the people in that series are all very untrustworthy and they're all constantly betraying each other, and this could fit for so many of the characters and plot lines in this series. But there we go. And also it's a good one to reread at the minute, because the sequel series is coming out early next year. For Joseph and the Maids in Technicolor Dreamcoat, it is to reread a childhood favourite. I can't say what your childhood favourites are. For me, I would potentially reread something by Meg Cabot, because she was definitely an author that I read a lot as a kid. Or, you know, if you want to go like actual smaller child, Jacqueline Wilson is up there as well. But I don't know what your favourites were. For the last 5 years, we have a book with heartbreak, and for this one I'm going to say they both die at the end because it's very much on my brain because I've just read the first to die at the end, so actually either of those would work for this. And to be honest, any Addams Family book tends to be very heartbreaking. And also I've definitely mentioned other ones on this list that are heartbreaking. I just wanted to pick something different, and like I said, I just finished the first day at the end, so I thought this worked quite well. I also did have Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo down on this one as well because there is some heartbreak in there as well. But yeah, it's hard to know in a way if something's going to be heartbreaking because maybe you don't want to know that going into it, but I thought like the first to die at the end kind of in the title, and if someone's got 7 husbands you expect there to be a heartbreak at some point, so those ones are a little bit obvious. And also I thought they tied quite well together, both being sort of like book talk darlings as well. For Legally Blonde we have Out of Your Comfort Zone. Again, I cannot give you a recommendation for this. For me, it would potentially be reading something like a horror or a thriller because that is something I don't read very often, but I don't know what is in your comfort zone and what isn't. For Les Miserables we have a big book, and for this I'm going to recommend anything by Robin Hobb because all of her books are pretty damn chunky and I love her books so much. So if you're already reading them, continue whichever you need to read next. Unless you're on the Rainwell Chronicles, they don't necessarily count for big books, some of those are shorter. But if you haven't started reading them yet, please read Assassin's Apprentice, it is fantastic. For The Lion King we have An Animal Companion, and for this I'm going to recommend Nevernight. I don't think Mr. Kindly would like to be called an animal companion, but that's what I'm calling him anyway. For Little Shop of Horrors, the prompt is a horror, and I am not going to give you a recommendation because I do not read horrors, so all I'm going to say is please go talk to Jem at Bookish Gems because she is the person that you need to speak to for your horror recommendations. For Mamma Mia we have A Mystery, and for this one I'm going to go with Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson, which is about this school where each of the students has like a special interest, and our main character Stevie, her special interest is this sort of mystery that happened at the school many years ago, and she wants to solve it. And when she gets there, clues start appearing, and it is sort of like an old school mystery book, and I really love this series. I actually really love the new book in the series as well, where it's sort of gone away from that mystery now. We've like done the original trilogy and we've gone to like standalone stories now, and I'm still really having a good time. For Matilda we have a book about books, and for this one I'm going to recommend The Dead Romantics. It is a newer release, but I got an arc of, and I want more people to read it because it was just really fun, but also had some hard-hitting moments. It's about someone who works as a ghostwriter, and she's struggling with writing these romance novels because she's had some issues with her own romantic life. She goes to her new editor, has a little bit of a debate with him about it, and then suddenly she ends up having to go back to her family home because there is a sort of family emergency. While she's there, she opens her door and the editor is on her doorstep and he is a ghost. Things go from there. It's a very fun book, but also, like I said, very like moving as well, which is also a prompt. And it is a book about books because she is a writer and he is an editor, so obviously that is a lot of their conversations. The next couple I'm not going to give you recommendations for because for Miss Saigon we have a book that is set in a culture that is not your own. I do not know what your culture is. You decide what book you want to read for this. And then for Moulin Rouge we had to reread a favourite, which again, I do not know your favourites. You decide what you want to read. I may reread Red, White and Royal Blue yet again. For My Fair Lady we have a makeover, so this can be a book with a makeover scene or it can be a book that has had a makeover. For this I'm going to go with Vicious by V.E. Schwab because I'm going to post the original cover that I had and I'm going to post my new cover that I have. We can see that one of these had a glow up. I really hated my original cover of this. I got rid of it the second I got the hardback because I love this one a lot more. But this is a book that is all about sort of like anti-heroes and grey morality, and I love it so much. I'm very happy that I now have a prettier version of it. For Newsies we have Found Family, and for this I have to recommend anything by Casey McQuiston. I've obviously already recommended Red, White and Royal Blue, so I'm going to recommend One Last Stop because the Found Family vibes in that one, I love it so much. The main character in this, August, she moves to New York City and she moves into this apartment, and it is just full of the best bunch of people that you can possibly meet. Like all of the side characters in this are so fully fleshed out. I just wanted to live in that apartment with them. The main storyline is actually about how she meets this woman on a train and ends up in a flirtation with them, and then finds out that actually they're stuck on that train and they're from the 1970s and there is a whole like time travel element going on. It's a strange book to describe, but it's so good, and particularly the found family aspect of it. For Phantom of the Opera, the prompt is to read a classic. I've already recommended a classic before, and I have another one to come in a minute, but for this one I'm going to recommend Little Women. It is one of my favourite classics. I actually need to read the second part of it, so if I do decide to do this prompt, I may end up reading, is it Good Wives, I think it's called, but it is the second half of like the story, you know, of Little Women. If you've watched any of the adaptations, it's usually Little Women and Good Wives, and I've read the first half, so everything's all happy at the minute, and I know it's going to take a turn for the worst and I'm not ready for it. For Prince of Egypt, we have a sibling relationship. For this, I'm going to go with Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which is one of my favourite romance books that I've read this year. It's about a girl called Delilah Green who comes back to town for her stepsister's wedding and basically did not leave town on the best of terms, and then she ends up in a bit of a romantic relationship with the stepsister's best friend, and it's about sort of how things happen around that wedding and how everything's dealt with her, like with her coming back to town. And there is a strong relation, and there is quite a lot to do with the relationship with her and her stepsister, so thought it'd be a good one for this. And also the second book is due out soon, and that is about the stepsister, so it works quite well. For the prom, we have a book with a party, and for this one I'm going to recommend another classic. I'm very sorry, it's a very short classic though. It's Great Gatsby. I mean, one of the like iconic lines in this is, I don't care, he gives large parties and I like large parties, they're so intimate, small parties, there isn't any privacy. I love this book. It's another one that is a contender for favourite classic of all time of mine, and it's very, very short. It's a very quick read. It's a novella rather than a novel. For Rent, we have multi-POV, and for this one I'm going to go with Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. It's a weird book to explain because it is, if you take Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, Kath in that is writing fanfiction about the Simon Snow series. This is not the actual Simon Snow series. This is kind of what Rainbow Rowell would do with those characters. So it's kind of her fanfiction of this fake series that she made up, but it is sort of the chosen, but it's about like a chosen one trope, a wizard school type thing, and also there's a vampire. The vampire and the chosen one are roommates, and then they fall in love, and I love this series very, very much. But there are different perspectives. There is Simon, Baz, and then some of their friends as well. So you've got like Penelope and Agatha, and a few others that come in along the way, and I really, really enjoyed this book series. For the Rocky Horror Show, we have a buddy read. Again, I cannot pick this for you. Buddy read whatever you want to buddy read. For Singing in the Rain, we have a Sunshine book, and for this I picked Song for the Wild Bill, which is just a book that made me really happy. It is another novella. It is about a robot and a tea monk and them sort of discovering the world together, and I very, very much enjoyed this book, and it just made me smile. So it is a Sunshine book. For 6, we have a book with Royalton, and for this one I'm going to recommend The King is Dead by Benjamin Dean. Again, another one that I just really enjoyed this year, and I want to find an excuse to recommend it on my channel. It's about a young prince who suddenly finds himself king when his dad dies, and the nation doesn't know that he's gay, so he's struggling with like what's going to happen if people find out about that. And then suddenly there are these blackmail notes that start appearing around the castle. It's kind of got like a Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars type vibe to it, and I had a really good time reading it. It was also a recommendation from Becca to me, so I feel like it works quite well for the 6th prompt as well, because that show is always going to be connected to Becca these days. So there we go. For Spring Awakening, we have alternative format. This can be that you read an audiobook, it can be that you read a graphic novel. I picked a couple of books that are written in verse. So this is actually a style that I really, really like. Two of my favourites are Black Flamingo by Dean Atter and The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. They are both written in verse. Both of these writers are sort of like spoken word poets, and they just work really, really well, both of these novels. So yeah, I'm going to recommend both of those. For Sunset Boulevard, we have an older character, and I'm going to do a book that I kind of recommended earlier, but it was a second recommendation, so it doesn't count that I've repeated it. But it is Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because this book is kind of told as Evelyn Hugo recounting her life in Hollywood and all these relationships that she's had. So she is an older character telling the story. So definitely works for this. For Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, it is a revenge story, and I'm going to be very, very vague with this because I believe this book is best off going in knowing as little as possible. But I'm going to say Shrine to the Dreamer because there is definitely an element of revenge in this. But this basically is about a character called Laszlo who is fascinated by this city which is called the Lost City of Weep. It's not actually called Weep, but the name got forgotten many, many years ago, and then all of a sudden he is given the opportunity to travel there and find out a little bit more about what happened and why no one really remembers the place. And that's all I'm going to say. For Waitress, we have a sweet book, and for this I'm going to go with Rosaline Palmer Takes a Cake. There is actually some heavy topics in this, but it's all set around a baking show, which is basically the Great British Bake Off. So it definitely works for Waitress because there are so many sweet things that are involved in this book. But it's actually a book that deals with some like heavier topics. Like I said, it's got a bisexual main character, and it's how sort of other people view that as well, not necessarily in the best way. And I really enjoyed this book, and I need to double check when the sequel's coming out actually, because I believe it's any time now. Now for the next two recommendations, I'm going to get two books from the same series, but not actually the first book from the series, but technically they are companions and you can read them separately. But I'm sure you can get the first book in for a different one. Actually you can, I forgot to mention it earlier. Basically, the prompts are Wedding Singer, which is Friends to Lovers. For this one I'm going to recommend Take a Hint, Danny Brown, because the two main characters in this are friends before it ends up becoming a relationship. We then have got West Side Story, which is Enemies to Lovers. For this one I'm going to say At Your Age, Brown, because these two main characters do not get on at the beginning. And the other book obviously that I haven't mentioned is Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which I should have mentioned earlier because this one would work for second chance as well. It's a different type of second chance than a second chance romance. Chloe has a near-death experience at the beginning of this book, so it's a second chance on life instead. There we go, I'm giving you all the ways to get that second chance prompt in. And I just really like the Brown Sister trilogy, and I haven't talked about it for a while. It would also obviously work for sibling relationships. And then we do have two last prompts. I promise I'm nearly done. So we have Wicked, which is a villain story, and for this one I'm probably going to be reading Demon in the Wood, which is a graphic novel, which is about Darkling from the Shadow and Bone series. And I haven't got my hands on my copy yet, but it should be arriving soon from Illumicrate. And then the other book that I could recommend, I have already recommended once, but I just wanted to say it again, Vicious by V. Schwab. It is a very sort of like morally grey anti-hero and villain type story, and I would recommend it to anyone. And then finally we have The Wizard of Oz, which is a hero story. So I thought I've done like a supervillain type character in Vicious. Let's do an actual superhero. And I'm going to recommend The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune, which is a very different vibe from Vicious. It's a YA fun, it's a YA superhero story. It's very fun. I love TJ Klune's writing. I'm sad that I haven't managed to get more of his books on this recommendations list. But I also do actually need to read the sequel to this. So maybe that can be one of my books that I read this month. Right, I have rambled for a while. This is going to be fun to edit, but I hope I've given you guys some ideas of books that you could read. And if you guys have any recommendations for me, please do leave them down below. If you've got any questions about any of the books that I've recommended, you want to know a bit more because I know I've skimmed through them very, very quickly, leave it down below and I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. But thank you guys for watching. I'm so excited for this readathon and I hope you guys are too. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff down below, and I will see you guys next time with a new video. Bye.